Welcome, everyone. My name is Jay Shofet, coming to you from Tel Aviv, and from in another one of our series of webinars from the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. So thrilled to be doing this for the entire year of COVID. We're over 35 of these webinars now, pretty much now every other Sunday. And actually next Sunday, we're going to be having a live birding ceremony from the ringing session from Jerusalem, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you, Avi Sadiv in our Toronto office, doing back office here today instead of Lawrence Casimir, who's often with us. Lawrence just had a baby boy, Mazal Tov. We're going to get going in a moment with Dr. Yoav Perlman from our the Israel Birding Center, our Ornithological Center, BirdLife Israel. I'm not going to say too much about that. We'll let Yoav do most of the talking about the birds. And I'm just going to thank everybody for the great support that we've received so far for the emergency campaign after the disastrous oil spill that happened here in late February. We immediately launched an emergency campaign around the world, took in quite a bit of money from all over the world, from Israel, from North America, from Europe. Not huge amounts of money as are needed, but it was a very heartwarming and appropriate and well appreciated, much appreciated response to our initial emergency appeal. We're updating that appeal, looking at the long term now. Cleanup is underway and will be largely done probably in a few weeks. The first beaches are beginning to open in Israel tomorrow, I believe. Little by little over the next few weeks, they're going to open. It's true that especially on the rocky coastlines, the oil has not been easy to clean and maybe with us indefinitely. But the bulk of the cleanup and the mass amounts of volunteers that have been needed is going to wind down over the next few weeks, maximum a few months. And we're looking at preventing the next oil spill. And for that, we have a detailed, comprehensive plan to do three other main things. I'll mention them briefly. The most important is we have to thwart this terrible agreement between the Eilat Ashkelon Pipeline Corporation and the United Arab Emirates from October, a semi-secret agreement which we've now petitioned under the Israel's Freedom of Information Act to get the contents of, but it will allow for massive oil tankers to take Arab oil, United Arab Emirate oil, from their ports to the Mediterranean Sea through the port of Eilat, where it will be put into aging pipelines. The Eilat Ashkelon Pipeline Corporation. It's a holdover from when Israel had relations with the Shah of Iran, and we pumped Iranian oil through the Gulf, from the Gulf through overland to the Mediterranean. Fortunately, haven't done that in a long time, but except on a very small basis, about 5 oil tankers a year dock at Eilat. And according to this agreement, we understand there'll be up to 150 and much bigger tankers. So a lot of oil will be flowing if this goes through, this agreement that was signed in October, and it will mean the danger of oil spills in Eilat around the very sensitive area of the coral reefs, one of the most important coral reefs in the world. Has not undergone bleaching or acidification. One of the northernmost coral reefs, hugely important to the world and to science, and to Eilat and to us. It's going to be a huge risk if this agreement happens. And so we're taking the long view to try to, not so long view, but we're immediately working toward, in this election campaign, to get the candidates aware of and on board with our position that this has to stop. Somebody said they lost my sound. I hope everybody else can hear me. Yoav, if you can hear me, raise your hand. I can see you. Good. Yes. Okay. We want to make sure that when the next government gets formed, if it gets formed after these elections that are happening here on March 23rd, the candidates are already aware of the dangers of this pipeline deal, oil deal, and we'll be ready to put in the coalition agreement that it's to be stopped. We basically need a government resolution to thwart this deal. The other thing we're going to do is we're trying to put life in, oversee the fact that the government has finally woken up to the fact that the 2008 Maritime Disaster Contingency Law was enacted but never funded. A unit in the Ministry of Environmental Protection was never funded. It was never given staff and never made any plans for exactly this type of contingency. And very belatedly, last week, the government allocated 45 million shekels to get this process off the ground, but we're going to be watchdogging the heck out of it through lobbying and science and research and from a public policy perspective. The third area that we're going to look at is the issue of the Israel's economic waters, the EEZ, the Economic Enterprise Zone of Israel, which according to UN Charter is an area that is from the territorial waters, which is 12 nautical miles off the coast, to 200 nautical miles off the coast of Israel. A huge area which is as big as almost the state of Israel. We call it the blue half, and these waters are very important to us. They're waters that the sovereign nation Israel in this time can be, the resources can be exploited. We have to make sure this does it very, very well. And we'll be talking more about this, and you'll be hearing from us by mail in the coming days and weeks. So please think about how important this is for the long-term future of Israel, protecting our maritime environment, and thank you very, very much for your support. With no further ado, Dr. Viral Perlman is the scientific director of BirdLife Israel. He's responsible for a lot of the research and the strategic directions that the BirdLife Israel is taking and has been taking. A lot of interesting projects under his wing, so to speak, and he will be now reporting on the state of the birds and what's been happening with the bird population in Israel over the last decade or so. So please, Joe, no further ado, take it over, and we'll leave the last 10 minutes or so for questions, and looking forward to it. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think it would be best if people have questions. They should do it on the Q&A rather than chat, because then the chat keeps flashing up on everyone's screens all the time. So please try to use the for questions. I think that would work better.
Great.
But let's get going. So thanks, Jay, for the introduction. Yeah, so I'll talk for about 40 minutes, something like that, and we'll have sufficient time for questions and answers after we're done. Thank you everyone for joining. It's great to see everyone here. It feels a bit more like a Live Aid than a birding webinar. People from all over the world, and it's fantastic to see some good friends here. So hello to everyone. In my presentation, I'll try to talk about some processes that have been going in our country in the last few decades. In Israel, like everywhere else in the world, there are things happening, nothing is static, everything is dynamic. I'll try to talk about some of the main processes. Of course, I won't be able to address all of the different changes, but I'll try to talk about some main directions and main processes. And we'll close the presentation with some actions and things that we need to do. Sorry. Okay, so many of you, I'm sure, joined previous webinars that we did about birds and birding in Israel. And I think many people, when they think about birding in Israel or the birds of Israel, they think about hundreds of thousands of birds filling up the skies, simultaneously huge flocks of thousands of white storks. This is actually the peak period. The next week is the peak period. We're expecting something like 500,000 white storks to pass through Israel within the next couple of weeks, sometimes in huge flocks of tens of thousands together. Later on in spring, we're expecting other migrants to come through, like these white-winged terns. They could come in their thousands, and it's really spectacular to see them coming in off the Red Sea against the backdrop of the Jordanian mountains, some of them landing at the salt pools, really fantastic and beautiful and breathtaking scenes of bird migration and breeding birds. Flocks of bee-eaters exhausted after crossing the desert land in Israel to rest and to feed before moving on. So colorful, so beautiful. And birding in Israel truly is spectacular. It has been, and it still is. March, we're in March now. This is the best time of year to look for these beautiful Sylvia warblers. This morning I walked in some desert wadis in the Negev, and I saw Rupel's warblers, and it's all so beautiful and lush, and everything is singing, and it's really fantastic to be out in Israel these days now. And I'm sure you've seen these slides before, but as you all know, there's reason to this richness in birds of Israel. We are positioned at an international crossroads, a bottleneck of migration connecting between the wintering grounds in Africa and the breeding grounds in Eurasia. And these birds, they just have to cross through Israel. They funnel through Israel and concentrate here. Additionally, Israel, across its relatively small area, it has the area of New Jersey, more or less. It's extremely diverse habitats, from alpine habitats of Mount Hermon to the harshest, driest desert, through steppe habitats and wetlands and Mediterranean scrub and everything in between. So all of this creates really fantastic experiences for birders coming to visit Israel. And Israel is really important from that perspective. However, and this is a big however, birds in Israel are suffering from similar processes to other parts of the world. It's all over the world. It's the same story with maybe different nuances or different micro processes, but the big picture is quite the same in Israel, like in other places. Climate change, as you know, climate is changing all over the world, and it's affecting birds like other organisms. Migratory birds face increasing pressure. They need to migrate longer distances. There's a mismatch between their arrival dates and other biological processes. And a lot of problems caused by climate change. In Israel, like anywhere else in the world, the population is increasing, and it creates horrible processes of habitat loss and habitat degradation and fragmentation. It's very, very difficult in Israel as in anywhere else in the world. Illegal killing, that's a big problem in the Middle East and around the Mediterranean basin. Luckily, in Israel, there's less illegal killing compared to our neighbors, but still there is illegal killing in Israel, and there's legal killing that's not properly managed. We see these processes in Israel as well. And as a result, there are things happening in Israel. So I'll talk about these main processes in my presentation today. So populations are either increasing or decreasing. Some are staying stable, more or less. Migration patterns are changing. Birds that used to migrate in one way, now they have another migration pattern. And there's new stuff coming. Colonists are arriving in Israel. Some arrive naturally, some are invasive species. And I'll try to address these main processes now. I'll start from an overview of the Red List of Israel. So the Red List of Israel is a list that classifies which species are under risk of extinction in Israel with different categories. So our last update was rather recently in 2017. My organization, BirdLife Israel, we partnered with the Israel Nature and Parks Authority, and we evaluated 213 species breeding in Israel. 65 were found to be threatened currently, and another 14 regionally extinct. So quite a significant percentage of breeding birds in Israel are threatened or are already locally extinct or extirpated. So this is not a good sign to start with. I'll give some examples for recent extinctions or extirpations. So little ring plover, quite a widespread species globally or in Europe and in Asia. Used to breed in Israel mainly on sandy beaches. And the beaches in Israel are suffering. It's not only the recent oil spill, but there aren't any remote or wild sandy beaches in Israel anymore. Israel is too crowded for that. And we lost our little ringed plovers in the last couple of decades. Another species that only recently, about 10, 15 years ago, stopped breeding in Israel is bimaculated lark that used to breed on some grassy mountains in the Golan Heights. Does not breed there anymore. So these are two examples. Some extinctions that happened a bit earlier. These are two examples of raptors, of vultures. On the left, lappet-faced vulture. This is a rare photograph by Dror Galili. Thanks, Dror, for allowing me to use this rare photograph from 1968. It's a scan of a slide he took in 1968. So these lappet-faced vultures don't breed in Israel anymore. The last pair stopped breeding in the late 1980s, and they sort of roamed the Negev until the mid or early 1990s, and not anymore. We don't have them as breeding birds anymore. Lammergeier, more or less at the same time. They used to breed in the deep canyons of the Judean desert. As a kid, I was lucky still to see both of these vultures breeding in Israel. The Lammergeiers stopped breeding in the late 1980s. Both of these species still arrive in Israel as vagrants, but they're extremely rare and they just don't breed in Israel anymore, unfortunately. But it's not only these birds that are already extinct. Other raptors in Israel are facing extinction. These two species, on the left, it's the Eurasian griffon or griffon vulture, and on the right, golden eagle. Both species are critically endangered in Israel, suffering greatly from too many threats, electrocution, power line collision, poisoning, many other, the disturbance, many other problems. Sorry.
May I interrupt you a second? People have asked if you could say the names of the birds in Hebrew as well.
Okay.
In general.
Okay, sure. I'll try to remember. צד שמאל, נשר, צד ימין, עית זהוב. So golden eagle, currently we have less than 15 pairs breeding in Israel. They breed exclusively in the desert of Israel, and they're really not doing well. People who visited Gamla in the 1980s and 1990s, you'd come to Gamla in the Golan Heights and you'd see tens or even sometimes hundreds of griffons flying past that observation point. Not anymore. And nowadays, a visit to Gamla could end up with a flat zero of vultures. They're almost completely extirpated from the north of Israel. So that's very sad, and they're really on their way out, both of these species, and they represent this whole group of large birds of prey that breed in Israel. Most of them are threatened to some extent. This is an Arabian warbler, in Hebrew, Sivchi Shittim. It's an ambassador, or it represents the acacia scrub along the Rift Valley and the Arava Valley and near Eilat. This habitat suffered huge reduction in its area due to cultivation, mainly development of cultivation along the Rift Valley. And with the disappearance of the acacia scrub in the Arava Valley, this lovely bird, we have an endemic subspecies, Negevensis. It's again critically endangered in Israel. Something like 50 pairs breeding in Israel. Yeah, they're not doing well. I'll try to give a positive, or at least half positive example. People who know me know that this is my baby, Nubian Niger, in Hebrew, Takhmas nubi. I did my MSc research on these guys, on these enigmatic night birds that breed mainly in the southern end of the Dead Sea. When I worked on them in the 2000s, they were concentrated only there, south of the Dead Sea, at only one site. And in the last 10 years, they seem to do quite well. We started finding them in other sites that they disappeared from in previous decades. With the local regeneration of their habitat, the salt marsh, they seem to be improving their status, and as a result, they climbed up from critically endangered in the previous assessment to vulnerable in the current assessment. So they seem to be doing better. Not great, but they seem to be doing better. An example for a recent colonist that arrived here naturally. This is the black-winged kite, a beautiful, beautiful raptor. When I started birding in the 1980s and 1990s, they were extremely rare. I remember the first time I twitched one. It took me 3 times until I eventually saw my first one in Israel. It was in the Bet Shan Valley in 2003. And during the 2000s, we started receiving more and more of them. They became more regular. They started to breed in 2011. So we found the first nest in Israel in 2011. And since then, they've become one of the commonest birds of prey in Israel, in some places commoner than kestrels. They seem to be very well adjusted to the farmland system in Israel. They feed mainly on voles, so they're doing a good service for farmers. On the right-hand side, this map is breeding records in 2020 in Israel. So they really breed, these are eBird records. They don't breed in the harshest desert, and they don't breed on mountaintops, but almost everywhere else they can be found, possibly already a few thousands of pairs breeding in Israel. So really an impressive success story for them. Yeah, I talked about Nubian Nigers. Just forgot to talk, this is in Hebrew, Da'ash Chorat Katef. Yeah, the nighttime is a good time to make discoveries. And in recent years, we've discovered quite a few interesting night birds that breed in Israel that we weren't aware of their breeding. Either they remained under the radar until they were discovered in recent years, or maybe there are some new processes. So on the left, it's the Egyptian Niger, in Hebrew, Takhmas Mitzri. They breed mainly around the Dead Sea, the northern end of the Dead Sea, in quite unhospitable habitat, but they seem to be doing quite okay. A few tens of pairs. So they were found breeding only in 2015 for the first time that the proper breeding was found in Israel. Pallid scops owl on the right, in Hebrew, Sair Mesurtat. It was found breeding in Israel by chance, again in 2015. They breed in mature date plantations along the Rift Valley between south of the Bet Shan Valley down to the Dead Sea region. Probably several hundreds of pairs breed in Israel. And yeah, there were a couple of very old casual breeding records from the early 20th century. So this was the first time they were found breeding for over 100 years. So it was fantastic to find them. Yeah, so these are two new discoveries, very interesting night birds. I'll give another two examples that represent the groups of species. Great tit is doing quite well in Israel. It's basically a northern species, a European species that extends its range to the south down to Israel. Originally, it was very common in the Mediterranean half of the country, the northern half of the country. But with the development of villages and towns and cities in the desert regions of Israel, they use these villages and plantations and groves and cultivation as stepping stones into the desert. They penetrate deeper and deeper into the desert. They've already reached Eilat. A pioneer pair has reached Eilat recently, and maybe they'll breed there this year. And it's a similar story with blackbirds and jays and Syrian woodpeckers, Mediterranean species that are extending their range down into the desert. Namaqua dove is an African species that is extending its range north and west. Originally, it was really restricted to the southern end of the Rift Valley. And in recent decades, it's extended its range north all the way up to the Hula Valley, and west. It has become rather regular and quite widespread in the Negev and in the center of Israel, along the Mediterranean coast. More and more of them are breeding in these places, and there are a few other species that are behaving the same. Striated heron, and Fitman grobim is doing the same. Green beater, the same. There are a few other species that are extending their range out of the Rift Valley into other parts of the country. Just the names again in Hebrew. On the right, Torit zanvanit. On the left, Yargazi, small Yargazi. Another very interesting process that we're seeing in Israel in recent years, it could be linked with climate change. So climate change in the desert regions of Israel, it's represented by more extreme weather events. So when it's hot, it gets very, very hot. Last summer, we had a record-breaking day of 56 degrees Celsius. I don't even know how much it is in Fahrenheit, but it's very, very, very hot. It was recorded in late May last year. I was working down at the Dead Sea that day, and it was unbearable. It was really crazy. But on the other side of these extreme events, when it rains very, very hard. Sea temperatures are higher. Storms that arrive in Israel have higher energy, and they release sometimes that energy in concentrated areas, sometimes in the desert. And in recent years, we see more and more of these extreme rain events in the desert, and some nomadic bird species like these two examples. On the left, the pale rockfinch, in Hebrew, Dorit Kitzrat Etzbaot. On the right, thick-billed lark, Efroni Av Makor. They utilize these patches of extreme productivity for very rapid breeding. We saw this first breeding event, major breeding event in 2010. Last year, in 2020, we had a similar extreme rain event in the desert that resulted in an explosion of breeding in the desert. And these are things that we just never had until the last 10, 15 years. And it's really, for instance, for thick-billed lark, it's really changed its status. Until we started getting those extreme rain events, they were extremely rare in Israel and hardly ever seen. And now, especially since that huge breeding event in 2010, they became a regular breeding bird in our desert. Maybe they don't breed every year, but they're present continuously. And they breed whenever the conditions are right, and it happens more and more often. Israel is a very good place for invasive species. The habitat is right. Many of these species are close to human habitation, but not only. And some of these species are extremely successful in Israel. Common myna is maybe the most extreme example. The first escapees were in 1999. Now they are really one of the commonest birds in Israel, everywhere around the country, from the Mount Hermon down to Eilat, everywhere. They're too common, some might say. We still don't have enough data on how or what is the interaction between mynas and other species. We're learning more and more, but surely with so many big aggressive birds like mynas, some species aren't faring well. Monk parakeet is another example. Again, a very, very successful invasive species, mainly along the coast and in the coastal plains, but not only. And also they're becoming very, very common in some places. Yeah, so these are two examples. There are a few other species. In Hebrew, משמאל תוכי נזירי, מימין מיינה מצויה. Yeah, another group of species that's doing very bad in Israel, like in other parts of the world, are the trans-Saharan migrants. So some species breed here in Israel and migrate to winter in Africa. And across the board, these species are declining. Similar processes are happening in Europe, that the long-distance migrants are suffering more than the resident species. On the left, it's Kretschmar's bunting, בעברית גיבטון אדום מקור. It's a species specific to Bata habitat, B-A-T-H-A. And many of these species that are linked with this habitat are declining in Israel. On the right, rufous-tailed scrub robin, חמריה, בעברית, חמריה חלודת זנב. It's more specific to tamarisk scrub. Yeah, and they're declining quite rapidly as well. Both are threatened in Israel. Another example that I want to talk about is the turtle dove. It is an iconic species, appears in the Bible, breeds in Israel, plus migrates through Israel. So big populations migrate through Israel. And it's experiencing a dramatic decline globally, mainly in Europe. It's globally vulnerable. So it's under a global threat of extinction. habitat loss, and illegal killing and legal killing are the main reasons for the dramatic decline of turtle dove globally. In Israel, they're threatened as well. They're declining as well, both the breeding population, and we have some very worrying indications for dramatic declines in the numbers of the migratory turtle doves passing through Israel. Maybe reflecting what's going on along the East Mediterranean flyway. They're really not doing well. Sadly, in Israel, they're still in the list of game species that are allowed to be hunted. We, BirdLife Israel, Society for Protection of Nature, we're trying to prevent this. It's not easy, but we are working hard on this, and hopefully we'll continue our success from the last hunting season when we managed to convince the relevant minister that hunting of turtle dove in Israel needs to be banned. And hopefully we'll manage to continue this ban for the next season and onward, I hope. It's not only the breeding birds that are suffering from declines. Obviously, many migrants are suffering declines in Israel. These are two examples for migrants that are European birds that migrate through Israel. On the left, redstart, common redstart, חכלילית עצים בעברית. On the right, tree pipit, פיפיון עצים. So both are strict migrants in Israel, and the numbers that we see today are much, much, much smaller than we used to have in the past. Actually, with redstart, it's an interesting story because we have two different populations of common redstart that pass through Israel. There's the southeastern population, the white-winged subspecies Samamissicus, that's probably showing a steeper decline compared to the European subspecies, but both are not doing well. And tree pipit across the board, smaller numbers are passing through Israel nowadays. It's very hard to say what are the reasons for this. Are the declines that we're reporting here in Israel, do they represent global declines, or are these migration shifts or changes? Maybe birds are using other routes. Maybe birds fly over Israel without stopping when in the past they used to stop. We really don't know, because in the countries in our neighborhood, there's hardly any monitoring. There's a bit in Turkey, a bit in Greece, but that's it, more or less. In other countries, there's no monitoring, so it's very hard to get a regional view of what's going on in these groups of species. And this is a research priority for us, together with BirdLife Europe and Central Asia, try and understand some large-scale processes. Some groups of species seem to be doing quite okay, some groups of migrants. The raptors that pass through Israel, they seem to be quite stable. So it's lesser spotted eagle, honey buzzard, steppe buzzard, common buzzard. They're doing relatively okay, I think. These are results of autumn counts that we did in Israel. We haven't done a proper count for a few years now. These counts were in the past funded by the Israel Air Force as a mean to reduce collision risks, but the Air Force is not interested in that kind of data anymore. And we haven't done a proper count of lesser spotted eagle since 2014, but they seem to be doing quite okay. You can see the drop in the numbers in the late 1980s. It's a result of the Chernobyl disaster. And you can see that in the 1990s and 2010s, there's been quite a nice increase back to the levels pre-Chernobyl, and they seem to be showing consistent numbers. So it seems to be the same with steppe buzzards and honey buzzards as well. The information that we're collecting at the two ringing stations, banding stations in Israel, one, the Jerusalem Bird Observatory, the other IBRCE in Eilat. The data that they generate there is extremely valuable and extremely important because they work in consistent methods. At the Jerusalem Bird Observatory, they've been working there for 25 years in standardized methods. The IBRCE, a slightly shorter period, but still enough, long enough time span to be able to see some very interesting trends. I'll compare some data of autumn migration, fall migration between the Jerusalem Bird Observatory and Eilat. So two examples for species that are the bulk of migrants in autumn are lesser white-throat, Sivchi Tochanim, willow warbler, Alvitophora. So these are the main species that pass through these stations in autumn. And you can see on the left that the numbers at the JBO seem to be rather stable, maybe even going up a bit. The habitat there has improved over these years, so maybe it has something to do with that, but also some populations seem to be doing okay. However, in Eilat, you can see quite a dramatic decline in the number of birds that are trapped there in autumn and since 2014. Quite frightening, actually. And again, you see the comparison between Eilat in the south, Jerusalem in the center. One process the process in one place is different to what's happening in another place. So maybe we are talking about some migration shifts and changes. It's a bit hard to say, again, because there's no data from other places in our neighborhood. Eurasian blackcap is another example. That's one of the main spring migrants at the JBO. Seems to be doing, well, the long-term trend seems to be quite stable. However, in recent years, since 2015, more or less, there's quite a serious decline. We need to continue monitoring there to see what's happening with the blackcap, Sivchi Shchokipa. But maybe in recent years, we are seeing declines, and it's the same in Eilat as well. Black kite is an example for a species that clearly changed its migration routes or migration patterns. So when I was a kid, black kite was an exclusive migrant, or almost exclusive, and very small numbers overwintered in Israel. All of them went to winter in Africa. And in recent decades, they changed their migration patterns completely as a result, possibly of climate change, but also local changes in Israel and in Africa. Many tens of thousands winter in Israel nowadays, concentrated mainly around landfill sites. They're very successful at eating garbage, and they've really become very, very, very common in Israel in winter. Some serious implications for that, including flight safety. It's quite complicated. Eurasian crane, another similar example. Again, when I was a kid, only few hundreds wintered in Israel. Nowadays, winter visit to Israel isn't complete without a visit to Agamon Hula. tens of thousands winter there every year. Quite spectacular, the sound, the noise, the smell, but they don't migrate to Africa anymore. They just spend the winter in Israel. Some of them do, but an increasing proportion, winter is in Israel.
Yoav,
yeah.
I just wanted to mention, if you could wrap up soon, we have a lot of questions.
Very soon. A group of species that is declining in Israel is some winter species, hen harrier, zeron tachol, stockdove, yonat etzim. Both species are declining quite well, including others, grassland species like pallid harrier from Central Asia. They seem to, that winter in Israel, they seem to be doing quite bad. Lapwing, kivit metzuyetzet, skylark. You can read Dan Alon's blog in our website, Old Notebooks Don't Lie. He wrote about these species, and it's quite frightening what's happening to some of these winter birds in Israel. So I showed you some different examples of different groups and different trends. I think that the overall process is not positive. I think we are experiencing more declines and deeper declines than increases. Certainly the more specialized species are declining. The more generalist species are increasing. Some species are stable, but I think the overall picture isn't too optimistic. And of course, we at the SPNI, we don't just roll our eyes and say this is horrible. We need to take action. From my point of view, these are some of the things that we need to do, and we are doing them. We need to strive for better monitoring and better understanding, better data on what's happening to our birds leads to more concise, more accurate conservation, and we need to strive for better data, better and higher and more data. We need to work on habitats. We need to find what are the most important habitats for birds and for other biodiversity, of course. We need to look at habitats for migrants. We need to look at habitats for breeding birds, and to try to zoom out as much as we can to protect large chunks of habitats. Israel is so important as a stopover site for for migratory birds. We really need to work on these most important habitats. Some species can benefit from specific actions. The most threatened species need to be targeted, especially those with important roles in the ecosystem, like raptors. So that's another thing. Restoration, rewilding, you can call it whatever you want, but we need to turn the wheel back in some places and restore places where there used to be wild or natural habitats and they're not there anymore. We must restore habitats and rewild Israel. Thank you. I'm done now. Thank you for listening. I want to thank you for your kindness. Jay talked about that and how wonderful all of the donations we got for different appeals. If you want to support directly our work at BirdLife Israel, this link here allows this. You can also find this link on our website, birds.org.il, where you can learn about our activities and what's going on about birds in Israel. You can see my contact details on the left. You're all very welcome to contact me if you have any further questions or you need any further information after this presentation. Thank you very much. I think we have time.
Yoav.
Questions, yeah.
Hi, Yoav. This is Avi, currently from Toronto. Thank you for this really, really interesting presentation. We have quite a few questions. I'll try to go through them very quickly because we have like 10, 15 minutes to go through them.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, regarding the oil spill, do you know the damage, if there is any, to the birds, and do we know where it came from?
I think first of all, the origin of the oil spill is still under investigation. So I don't want to give any misinformation. We don't have too much data on damage to marine birds. There were a few cases of seabirds found with oil stains, and a few died, but nothing catastrophic like was seen in other oil spills in other parts of the world. One reason for that is that the Mediterranean is relatively poor in seabirds. It's not a deep sea, and pelagic species don't enter the Mediterranean anyway. We have gulls, we have terns, and some shearwaters and some gannets, but it's not like oceans or deeper seas that are much, much richer in marine life. So relatively, there aren't too many seabirds or true seabirds along the coast of Israel. And as a result, we didn't see huge catastrophes in that respect. Of course, other animals, fish and marine mammals, sea turtles suffered much more, but we don't have too many indications for damage to birds.
Yoav, if I may quickly, this is like speed dating. You need to give like, a 1-2 sentence answer to these questions.
Okay, I'll
like
try.
20.
Do we know why there is so much illegal killing in the Middle East?
Yeah, in the countries around us, the Arab countries, unfortunately, hunting and killing animals is part of their culture, and it's very common unfortunately, in all Arab countries around us. In Israel, thankfully, less so. But it's not only countries; it's all over the Mediterranean basin, and actually, well, it's fair to say, almost everywhere in the world, hunting is very popular.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Is there a program or plan to reintroduce these birds that have been extinct from that area back to Israel?
So yes, we are working on some reintroduction programs. The Israel Nature and Parks Authority are responsible for that. They're doing a stellar job. However, reintroductions never work until you solve the problem. And the problems in Israel are not easy to solve because we just have too many people in our small country, I'm afraid. There's just not enough space for wildlife in some parts of the country. These are problems that are not easy to solve. There are programs happening. White-tailed eagle is actually a success story, and there are a few other success stories, but it's really not easy to reintroduce in such a crowded country like Israel.
Thank you. Are the invasive species pushing out native ones, and are there any programs to try and deter those invasive species?
Yes. So as I said in my presentation, we are in the process of collecting data on that. We still don't have enough data to show direct interactions. There are some probably indirect processes, but we're still learning on the direct processes. And I assume that in a few years we'll know more. But surely native birds are benefiting from millions of mice and parakeets everywhere.
You mentioned
SPNI. We can't be involved in direct management of these invasive species. The Nature and Parks Authority are responsible for that. However, SPNI is involved in legislation and other outreach and education actions to reduce this problem in the future.
Okay, thank you. Can you tell which species are clearly hurt by climate change and which are clearly helped by climate change?
Yeah, so I gave a few examples. I think as a group, the migratory birds, the long distance migrants, migrate between Central, Northern Europe and Africa. As a group, they're declining across the board. I think some local species are able to utilize some local weather events and actually benefit from that. Desert species, maybe some of them are benefiting from that. But I think probably as a result of climate change, more species are losing their grounds than gaining.
Okay, quickly, somebody, actually a few people asked about the name of the bird in your background and what is, sorry, hold on. And what is the turtle dove name in the Bible?
Okay, so this beautiful bird is the blue-cheeked bee-eater, Shakak Yarok. Tor, so in the Bible, it's Kol HaTor Nishma Be'artzenu. The voice of the turtle dove is heard in our country. It's a sign of spring when they return to Israel from Africa. So yeah, they're quite iconic birds. Tor Matsui.
Thank you. Can you explain the difference between the total and index data sets?
Okay, yeah, I can maybe quickly scroll. Yeah, so at the JBO, the total is the actual number trapped, and the index is a standardized number for effort. So there's some variation in effort between years. So the red line is the index, the standardized effort line.
Okay, if somebody wants to become a volunteer at the bending station, can they do that? How?
Yes, yes, certainly, especially so at the IBRCE. Currently, of course, with COVID, it is complicated, but hopefully in the not too far future, it will be allowed to travel into Israel again. And actually the work at the IBRCE is to a large degree dependent on international volunteers. Very welcome. You can contact the IBRCE through Facebook, Twitter, or through the website, and they will be happy to give information about that.
And of course, you can contact CSPNI, SPNI, ASPNI, and we'll all let Yoav know. Do you see windmills as a major problem?
So yeah, one of the main threats to migratory birds and to our birds of prey are wind energy production plants or wind turbines. They are killing huge numbers of birds. Luckily in Israel is a relatively windless country. So it's not a great place to utilize wind energy in Israel. We are working very hard to prevent or to move very dangerous wind turbine projects from the most dangerous spots, from really lethal locations to places where they're less dangerous. It's not easy. Of course, as a conservation organization, it's hard to object to renewable energy projects, and we can't just say no to everything. But yes, it's a big issue in Israel. Seriously, if you could choose the worst place on the globe to put up wind turbines, you'd choose Israel from this respect. So we are working hard on this, quite successful in some places, but it's quite a big issue. Yeah.
So we're out of time, but one last question: how is the the military training areas, is this a problem for birds, and how do you solve if there is a problem? How do you protect birds in those military areas?
Yeah, so I would say that most of the large nature reserves in the south of Israel have dual use, so they're nature reserves and military training zones. Most of these areas are actually quite well protected because civilians aren't allowed there, and there's less activity of that sort. So many of these places actually work quite well for conservation. We have very close cooperation with the IDF on many fronts, many units, many parts of the country. There's a joint project called the Tzva Hagana Lateva, very successful, and we are reaching some significant achievements there. Yeah, that's not too bad, actually.
Jay?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Avi. Yeah, unfortunately, we want to respect people's time and get going. People have been leaving. I'm sure some people would probably want to hear a few more questions, but I would say that if you have a question that we didn't get to answer, please feel free to write Yoav directly or write me on the email invitation where you received this. Of course, this webinar will be online in the next day or two in the same place on our website under upcoming and recorded webinars. There's usually a link in the first invitation to these webinars where you can find this online. Yoav, one final question though, I think is relevant to a lot of people. Somebody asked, when do you think the next birding tour might be to Israel?
That's a good question. We are hoping that maybe by the end of this year, we'll see the first groups returning to Israel.
Are you referring to the Jewish year or the,
no, the Roman year.
I figured you meant
towards fall or winter. Mm-hmm. Surely next spring, Champions of the Flyway will return to Eilat. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Third week in November, as usual, peak migration season on the southerly direction. So we hope to see you here, and we are planning as well for the fall a regular SPNI nature trip, which of course includes several birding sites in Jerusalem and in the Chula. So stay tuned for that as well. We're already advertising it online. I believe it begins November 5th, the first week in November, if I'm not mistaken. You could come and stay right through the Eilat Birding Festival, which hopefully will happen. Thank you, Yoav, so much. Thank you, Avi, and thank you to everyone. All our supporters around the world, and especially our board members and our dedicated volunteers in New York and Toronto and in other places around the United States and Canada. Of course, to our boards in the UK and in France. I was in touch with France today with a lot of interesting issues. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Appreciate the great attendance. Yoav, there were over 300 people at the peak here and another 35 on Facebook. So the rumors of people being over zoomed out after a year of COVID are apparently exaggerated. Thank you for helping us prove that. Thanks for a lot of great information about the avifauna in Israel. And thank you to Avi Sadiv for allowing us to present the avifauna. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good night. Good day from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.